The Alabama Crimson Tide are up next with our Meet the Transfer series. Um, Final 14 from a year ago, whose biggest headlines are that they are bringing back the core of that team, particularly Grant Nelson and Mark Sears. But they did a good job bolstering this roster through the transfer portal as well. I brought in four guys in the transfer class. Nate Oates and company did. Cliff Omoruyi, big man from Rutgers, is the big one. You brought in Chris Youngblood from South Florida, Aiden Holloway from Auburn, and Houston Mallette from Pepperdine. It's a pretty solid group. Pretty solid group for Nate Oates. Did him and the rest of the coaching staff, did they accomplish what they wanted to do this offseason by bringing these guys in?
I would say yes. It looks like just again, this is assuming the plan was to, for one, secure your interior with Cliff Mourier to just his presence alone should keep you out of being a sub 200 defense on Kimpom or wherever they finished. I know they're around there, I think. But and then in addition to Cliff, you get some good complementary pieces around both Mark Sears and Grant Nelson, and even some of the wings they brought in, whether that's Chris Youngblood, who's sort of been a 2-3 throughout his career at Kennesaw State, or if it's Houston Mallette. Both those guys aren't really going to eat into the minutes of Darian Reed, who's the big name freshman coming in, who you'll probably see start at the 3. So yeah, I think he did a good job of addressing the biggest flaw on defense and finding complementary pieces for the Stars.
Yeah, I think so too. They didn't need to go out and bring in headliners, right? Morier is that, but he is that. It was very obvious last season down the stretch that Bama's defense was horrible. Like, I think the last 10 games of the regular season that Bama played, they were 230 something in defensive efficiency per Torvik over that stretch. They did enough in the NCAA tournament to make the Final Four, and they deserve credit for that. But they got good defensive performances from their bigs in those games. Having a Mourier in there to be that anchor, I think, fills a big hole. And as you mentioned, you added more shooting, surprise, to what Nate Oates wants to do. You added the complementary pieces. I think it's perfect. Is there anything you wish they would have done differently, or anything else you think they could have done?
I mean, the only nitpick I would maybe have, it's a very well balanced roster. You have proven pieces, you have upside guys, you have complementary guys, like the ancillary pieces that are going to be there to fill a role. Maybe you look at what Aiden Holloway is, and I get he's sort of a lottery ticket as a former 5-star kid, played really high level ball coming out of high school. And as bad as he was for most of last season, he did have some flashes. Maybe for this roster with like a hey, we got one more year of Mark Sears, 1 year of Big Cliff. We're gonna go all in with win now pieces to try to win a national championship. You could look for a more proven like backup point guard. At the same time, though, whenever Sears sits, I mean, you got LeBaron Philon who comes in, very talented freshman. I mean, maybe Chris Youngblood could even run the point a little bit. Like again, he's played a lot of
Mm-hmm.
basketball already, so I would say it's a little bit nitpicky. But yeah, that's the one thing I can sort of like find a hole, so to speak.
Yeah, I again, I think this is a solid group. I think if you point to one, I think you do point to Holloway because I think it's just hard to find where he fits in this, right? As you mentioned, this is a win now roster. All five of your projected starters, well, five of your top six. I'm going to include Youngblood as either a starter at the 5 or maybe as a 6 man behind Reed. Um, are 5th year guys, 6 year guys. They're using the COVID year. You have a team that's built to win now, and the rest of your bench is essentially freshmen with some exceptions, but younger guys. Um, who are highly touted, all top 50 freshmen that come in this year, who expect to have big roles, if not this year, next year, right? And point guard is not necessarily one of those. The Baron Fillon maybe maybe playing point, maybe more of a 2. So is Holloway your point guard for that group, and you're going to bring him off the bench this year? Do you hope that you get the most out of him and that Auburn was just a bad situation and he plays a significant role for you this year off the bench? I don't know where he falls into that because if the freshman hit, there's not going to be a lot of playing time available for Holloway, and he doesn't strike me as
Mm-hmm.
somebody who's going to stick around a second place to not play as much as he wants to.
I'm with you. He's definitely going to be one of the interesting case studies to follow this year. Can Nate Oates? Because it's tough to say Auburn was a bad situation with the success Bruce Pearl has had with guards, especially guards
Yeah.
of his stature. Of course, I do think Oates is sort of on maybe a different level is too extreme to say, but Oates, I would give the edge to Oates when it comes to getting the
Yeah.
most out of guards and putting them into position to succeed. But yeah, he's going to be one of the more fascinating guys to follow just how his career plays out this year and beyond.
Yeah, and by situation, I just mean that Auburn had a lot of young, similar guards
Right, right,
this
for
past
sure.
year, right? And I think Holloway kind of got the short end of the stick, but should have. He shot 30 below 32% from the field last season.
Mhm.
He was not efficient at all. I think if you're Bama, I guess as we're going through this,
Yeah, let's go ahead and talk Aiden Holloway.
yeah, we'll talk Aiden Holloway because he's the one who we're going to start with. We're going to go through all four of these guys. We're going to determine if we think they're going to be a star, starter, role player, or non-factor. Essentially, we're going to order this by points per game from last season, and Holloway was the lowest at 7.3 last year. Mentioned how inefficient he was. If you're Alabama and you're Nate Oates, with your track record of guards and as talented and highly touted as Holloway was coming out of high school, if you are able to get that out of him, you then have another like high 4-star, 5-star level guard to add to your rotation, right? If he doesn't work out, you play the freshman. So as we're talking through this in real time, that's not necessarily a bad gamble to take for Alabama, but again, if you're trying to win a championship this year, I think you could give that scholarship elsewhere. I think Holloway ends up being more of a non-factor than I do a role player. Because if you go down this roster, Darion Reed's going to play. Aiden Sherrill is going to play. LeBaron Philon is probably going to play. Jaron Stevenson's going to play. Mohamed Diabate is going to play. I assume Houston Mallette with his shooting is going to play. That's 5 deep on the bench, right? So, like, if you are going to shoot 31% from the field again, you're not going to play for this Alabama team. And if you do, it's going to be like maybe 8 to 10 minutes a game.
Ralph, you forgot to mention Latrell Wrightsell too. Like there's another
I
guard
did.
competing for minutes. This team, like they have so many
I
dudes off
have
the
him.
bench
I
who are
have
just
him going off of Jim Root's roster sheet, which if you have not gotten, I highly suggest you do. It's the best way to keep track of all the movement this offseason. Have him in the starting lineup.
you have. Oh, he has Wrightsell projected.
He has Reitzel and Youngblood in the starting lineup.
Mm-hmm. And
So,
Reed off the
but
bench.
yes,
I'm guessing.
so like that doesn't even go through Sears, Reitzel, Youngblood, Nelson,
Mm-hmm.
Morier, right? So like, are you the 11th guy?
Yeah, I'm tempted to say non-factor for Holloway as well. He's gonna have to be that LeBaron Filan, again to be that backup point guard. And we had Grant Nelson on our Draftapalooza show, and Grant when I
Yeah,
we asked who's been standing out in practice, LeBaron Filan was the first person Grant Nelson mentioned. I think if you're looking hard enough, I guess Phylon was what? He was a top 30-ish recruit, played at Link Academy, one of the best prep schools out there.
mm-hmm.
So he's not like a surefire blue chip or one and done. Um, but at the same, so there's a chance that he could, maybe struggle a little bit stepping into a lead guard role. And if you look at some of like Holloway's best moments, he did have some like flashes as a playmaker for the rest of his team, as a pick and roll ball handler and everything. To yeah, if he can set his teammates up, maybe that could give him an edge. But I don't know. Based on what we heard from an Alabama player, and it checks out with what Alabama fans are saying, is that Barron might just be a bucket who commands a lot of minutes, and yeah, could send Holloway to the bench for good.
Yeah, I think there's a scenario where he is a role player and even a significant role player, but I think more likely than not, he ends up being a non-factor for this team. If we're being honest, Cliff Mourier is the next guy we're going to talk about. He averaged just over 10 points per game last season, 10.4, but we know that's not what he does. 8.3 rebounds, 2.9 blocks per game. That's why he was brought to this team, was to be the defensive anchor, hold things down on the glass. What kind of role do you see him having?
Starter, borderline star. I think I'd probably say he's a top 50, top 60 player in the sport going into the season. But he's not especially dynamic or even especially well rounded, but he rocks in his role. He's gonna
Yep.
probably be, if not lead the country in dunks, probably be at worst top three, top five. He's gonna block a ton of shots and alter more. It's a great system fit. It's exactly what this team needed. I mean, we've seen Oates have some success with like the lob threat rim protector archetype with Charles Bediako. And I think Amoruyi is a better version of that.
A much better version. I think he's going to be a defensive star. He will be talked about as a star, but will not have the offensive production to go with it. I think system fit is great, as you mentioned. Also, personnel fit. One next to Grant Nelson. When Grant Nelson struggled during much of the regular season, it was because of his lack of physicality, essentially. Having Moria in the middle is going to allow him to play more on the perimeter and be more the guy we saw towards the end of the season, the guy we saw dunking on Donovan Clingan, than somebody who is forced to do some things that he's more uncomfortable with. And also the pick and rolls with Mark Sears and catching those lobs with the attention that Sears is going to get, along with all those shooters on the outside. You're going to get a lot of highlight reel dunks as well from Warrior. Yeah, I think he's going to be fantastic. This was, if you weren't going to stay and play with all those stud freshmen at Rutgers, which would have been fun too, going to play for Alabama and spurning UNC. Sorry, Riley. Was the decision to make for Warrior.
I think playing at UNC would have been a better decision, but I won't get into that. I don't need Alabama fans coming after me. Let's move on. Let's talk. Who's next? Is it Chris Youngblood? No, it's
It's
Houston Mallette
Houston Mallette.
next.
It's Houston Mallette. He averaged 14.7 points in 31 and a half minutes per game for Pepperdine last season. But the kicker is 41.5% shooter from three last season. I think that's going to give him a role on this team because you have to shoot to play on the perimeter in a system. He's done it at a high level. He may not be a major factor, but a 15-minute per game role guy, I think he checks that box.
Might be a little bold. I'm going to say non-factor just because there's so many guards. I know he made a lot of threes last year at Pepperdine. He even got to the free throw line at a very impressive clip as well. I mean, he's 6'5". He has some of that like physical component, like able to draw contact, finish through it. More than just a shooter. Oddly enough, I think his like release is a little slow. I don't claim to be a shot doctor by any means. Oh, but I actually feel like I can break down 3-point shooting for him every once in a while. His I would say his mechanics are a little unorthodox to where might struggle, moving up a level and playing against SEC caliber length. But yeah, I think it's less about him and more so about LeBaron Filan and Latrell Wrightsell and Chris Youngblood and Darian Reed, who are all going to be commanding minutes on the wing. He's also wearing
Yeah.
number 95, which I hate. I wish he chose just the only acceptable basketball number in the 90s is 99.
I love the random numbers. I love them.
I just think 95 is such an ugly basketball number. If he's good, he'll rock it. I mean, if he
Oh
ends up
yeah,
like starting, it'll probably be pretty tough. But on the
you
surface, I'm
you
not a
can't
fan.
be 95 and a non-factor though. You
Yeah,
know what
that's
I
a bad
mean?
look.
I do think he will get consistent playing time. I think his role will depend on how ready the freshmen are and how many of the freshmen are ready to contribute. Because go down the list, I think all four of them, Reed, Cheryl, Fillon, and Nas Cunningham, more talented. It's just a matter of how ready they are to contribute right away. I think Mallette has some insurance in that department. Like there's a scenario he's a seventh, eighth guy in the rotation. There's a scenario where we talked about this with Aiden Holloway. Maybe Mallette's the 11th guy in the rotation and on man
Yep.
out. We'll see if he's the 11th guy. That means probably good things for Alabama. But that shooting, I think, gives him a chance to play a good role, the experience as well. I think we'll see him be one of the more reliable bench pieces. The last guy we haven't talked about, we brought up a number of times, Chris Youngblood from South Florida. Over 15 points per game last season, over 41% from three. Again, check those boxes as your NATO's going down the roster sheet here. What kind of role do you think he's going to have?
I think he's a starter. Yeah, I'd probably project him starting next to Mark Sears at the 2. I love that he's 6'4", over 200 pounds. I think he's listed at 215, so he's pretty well built. I'd like to see him play a little more physical at the rim, be a little more efficient finishing at the basket, but mean, the dude has made a ton of threes throughout his career. He's played I mean, he was kind of a heart and soul piece of those Kennesaw State teams under Amir Abdur. Oh my gosh,
Yep.
why am I blanking on his name? Amir Abdur Rahim.
Yep.
That got to the tournament, and yeah, I mean, the sniper component, good defender. I kind of think he translates pretty seamlessly up to the SEC, and especially in like this ancillary role he'll be in.
I think he does too, especially from the shooting standpoint. And next to Sears and Nelson, like if you're really allowed to be a number three guy, there's not going to be as much pressure on you on this team, right? Particularly with some of the talent they have coming off the bench. I think he'll be a starter as well. If he is not one of the starting five, I expect him to play starter level minutes because of his experience, because of his shooting, what he can bring defensively, being more of that glue piece. I think we see him fill that role as needed. Feel probably second most confident in him of this group. Amoruyi is obviously number one, but I would put Youngblood number two in that category. How would you stack these four up? We typically talk about which of these players we think is going to be best this season. I'm going to, for you, jump in and say I think Amoruyi is going to be the best for both of us, and we're gonna go there. But how would you rank these four in terms of what you're expecting from them this season?
I would say Mourier 1, Youngblood 2, Mallette 3, Holloway 4. But I don't know. Maybe it's just because Holloway's another North Carolina kid. Like I want to say he's from Charlotte or surrounding area to where I don't want to give up my stock in him just yet. To where I'm not confidently projecting him at the bottom of the group. But yeah, I think Amourier and Youngblood are a cut above the rest.
I think so too. I think that's how I would rank them as well. But who gets bet the most improved from the start of the season to the end of the season? Which one of the four?
Hmm. I gotta
I'll
go with
jump in.
Holloway. I'm saying
See,
Holloway.
I think Holloway goes from like kind of playing a role to being not in the rotation by the end of the year.
Are you going
I
with
think it's going
Mallette
to be a
then?
Morier. I think it's going to be a Morier
You
from a
think we see
standpoint
some?
of Grant Nelson. I'm going to follow the Grant Nelson path with this, where he showed some flashes early in the season, but struggled to kind of like find his footing. I do think Amourier has more of a defined role than Nelson did at the start of last season, so I expect him to have a stronger starting point. But as Nelson got more and more comfortable in Alabama's system and the way they played, then he became the guy that we thought he was going to be when he arrived in Tuscaloosa.
Mm-hmm.
I think Amourier is going to bring the defense, and I think the offense is gradually going to rise as the season progresses. And so I think by the end of the year, he's somebody who is going to be able to like a legitimate threat at the rim that you account for every time down the court because Alabama will have figured out how to use him appropriately in that role.
I like that a lot, and I think I agree with you, but I'm also going to contradict myself with my hot take.
Well, what's your hot take? What's your hot take for this transfer class?
Cliff Amourier by the end of the season is playing closer to 20 minutes per game than 30 minutes. And I
Okay.
say that because I think it. No, I don't like this. I was going to say it becomes more of a platoon with Grant Nelson at the five because I think Grant Nelson. I just think Grant Nelson might be best at the five, and that's when you look at how many guards with size they have, how many options they can even go to at the four. I That's sort of the
We
hot take I want
saw
to.
we saw what that did defensively for them last season, though.
It's
Right? Like
true.
that was a train wreck. That's why they went out and got him Morier.
I'm gonna stick by it. That's my hot
Okay,
take.
no,
It's hot for a
that's fair.
reason.
That's fair. I've kind of touched on mine. I think Aiden Holloway falls out of the rotation. I think he's the odd man out. I really like these freshmen. You're going to give Jared Stevenson and Muhammad Diabute. Goodness gracious, you're gonna give them some minutes as well. I'm gonna count on at least two of the freshmen hitting, probably Reed and LeBaron Fillon. I'm gonna throw Mallette in there, getting some minutes too, and then you're 10 deep there. I don't expect NATO to routinely play 11, 12 guys. He
Mm-hmm.
can. This roster certainly has the ability to, but I'm not expecting that to be the case. I think Holloway falls out of the rotation sooner rather than later. Um, this Bama team's good, man. This Bama team's good.
They're very good.
Do they make the Final Four again?
Mm, Ah, man. On paper, they should. It's just hard to go 2 years in a row. That's the only thing that's holding me back from it. Yeah. If we did a greater referendum on this, or maybe not referendum, wrong word, greater predictions for the season or big picture stuff, I still want to see the defense like sort of fix itself apart from Cliff because he's clearly like your anchor there. But you need, thought Rylan Griffin was actually did pretty well on that end, especially
Yeah.
toward the end of the season. And yeah, you got to have the perimeter guys figure it out at least a little bit more than they did last year.
Throwing caution in the wind.
We're
Bama's my
going
title
back.
pick. Bama's my title pick.
Wow.
Roll
Wow.
Tide.
All right. All right.
Cart, you know what I love about you?
That I'm handsome.
You're reliable. I can count on you. You know, honestly, you remind me of Aaron Henry a little bit. Remember when, like, you know, their back was against the wall, nothing was going right, and man just showed up every day. He didn't make excuses. There were no problems, there were just solutions.
Sounds like me.
That's you. And it also reminds me of Duncan Mechanical Solutions, because if you're looking for quality furnace repair, look no further than the heating and air experts that you can trust. Comfort and quality are their standard. They're an HVAC company that serves Northeast Indiana and Southern Michigan, whether it's heating and air conditioning, plumbing, kitchen and bath remodeling, or emergency services when you need them most. Duncan Mechanical Solutions has reliable service that you can count on. Cart, remember when your basement almost exploded?
I remember when my basement almost exploded. I remember when my furnace itself was acting funny. I remember when my AC was acting funny. I wish I had Duncan in my back pocket. I wouldn't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been anywhere in northern Indiana or southern Michigan that hasn't been perfectly cool or perfectly warm, depending on when the day called for. And that's because of Duncan Mechanical Solutions. They are the presenting sponsor for the month of July. Shout out to Duncan Mechanical Solutions. Go to duncanmechanicalsolutions.com to learn more.